One thing that needs to be done, which will eventually, is that the Catholic Church needs to depart from its principle of always being exactly 50 years behind the times. Abortion is here to stay. It's not a pleasant thing. I have known a number of ladies who've had abortions. I've never known anyone trot happily down and think, oh, this is a solution. It's a very stressful and often sad time, and we should realise that, but we should respect the rights of women to choose. And frankly, it is women to choose, not elderly priests.
Finally, no matter how much we despise protesters, we must have consistency in lawmaking. So why, oh why, have so many on opposition benches been celebrating the government's acceptance of amendments banning protests around abortion clinics? As a long-standing pro-choice campaigner, of course, I believe it's totally vital that women are able to safely access reproductive healthcare services. If they're being obstructed or harassed, we have public order laws to deal with this, and we should deal with them harshly. But Clause 9 criminalises and bans, as we've already heard, seeking to influence, advising or persuading, attempting to advise or persuade, or otherwise expressing an opinion. Many of us may feel little sympathy with people who are viewed as anti-abortion cranks, but as Big Brother Watch notes, this sets a precedent that will inevitably lead to attempts to prevent speech, expression, information sharing and assembly in relation to other controversial and unpopular causes. It's also worth noting that at least 5 councils with PSPO buffer zones around abortion clinics have banned silent prayers. This institutes a law of genuine thought crime and betrays any commitment to religious freedom, and we should totally oppose it. So in conclusion, I support the right to protest for all, not just the protesters I admire, but those I despise as well.
Now, I want to turn to Clause 9, inserted in the Commons, and I speak as someone who has always wanted the law to afford a degree of protection to the unborn child. And I say that to explain where I'm coming from. But I am not a supporter of some of the protest tactics which have taken place around clinics, particularly in the United States, but to some extent in this country. But when I look at Clause 9, I see understandable references to intimidation, harassment, threatening behaviour, and I'm prepared to consider whether the law needs to be strengthened to prevent these things. But I cannot support a clause which criminalises a person who seeks to influence, provides information, or expresses opinion. This is the most profound restriction on free speech I've ever seen in any UK legislation, and I could not support it if it remains in its present form. And indeed, I think it will be grasped as a precedent by the free speech deniers.
It's actually a pleasure to follow the noble Baroness O'Loan, and I must say I do agree with much of what she said, and will be speaking similarly in many respects. I am largely supportive of this bill inasmuch as it plugs gaps in legislation to stop serious and dangerous disruption. The country is trying to get back on its feet after a once-in-a-century pandemic, and protesters are constantly refining their tactics to cause as much disturbance as possible. My main concern with this bill is the ideologically inspired Clause 9, which has just been spoken about, introduced as an opposition party amendment in the other place. Of those who voted, all Labour MPs registered their support for the right to protest disruptively by voting against this bill at second reading. And also all voted for pro-life protesters' rights to be withdrawn. This is not just hypocritical, it exposes the cultural authoritarianism behind those who claim to want freedom to protest. Clause 9 is now the most restrictive part of the whole bill, allegedly to protect women from harassment, yet it goes significantly beyond banning harassment or even preventing, as is the stated intention of the bill, serious disruption. It bans protest for those who hold certain beliefs and their right to inform, persuade, advise, or even express opinion on the public street. Martin Luther King once said, "Every man of humane convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his convictions, but we must all protest." However, for some, the right to protest depends entirely on what one's convictions are. Pro-life convictions are deemed so abhorrent as to require a blanket ban and withdrawal of rights within certain spaces. Furthermore, it reduces the threshold of criminality to standards lower than ever before, and as currently drafted, would likely catch a parent, teacher, or social worker giving, at the request of a young or vulnerable person, rounded advice to help them make one of life's most difficult decisions. Instructively, 5 local councils have instituted buffer zones already. Bournemouth Council has prohibited the act of even crossing oneself in the vicinity, treating even peaceful presence as intimidation. All 5 councils have banned prayer, even silent prayer in the case of Ealing, flagrantly violating religious freedom. If prayer is considered a form of influence, then Clause 9 puts the UK's first thought crime into statute. Such sweeping criminalisation is out of all proportion to action which may, of course, be required to deal with inappropriate behaviour near abortion facilities. Where harassment and intimidation do occur, the police already have several different legislative mechanisms to choose from, including the 2022 Police Crime and Sentencing Courts Act. This empowers police officers to disperse or otherwise prevent those pro-life vigils which do risk causing alarm or distress in persons in the vicinity. A thorough Home Office review in 2018 found that police intervention into pro-life activity is very infrequently necessary, and instances of harassment outside abortion facilities are rare. Volunteers are mainly engaged in silent prayer or handing out leaflets offering charitable support to women who would like to be able to continue their pregnancies but feel powerless to do so without financial or practical help. A 2022 BBC poll found that 15% of women were coerced into having an abortion by partners or family members. One of my own close relatives became pregnant while still living in her parents' home and was forced to go down that route. As a society, we are rightly concerned about coercion in relationships and value the role of the voluntary sector in helping to identify cases. Yet at present, there is active disdain for pro-life charities' role in helping women step away from the people and pressures that are pushing them down the abortion route. One might say there is cultural coercion, an underlying assumption that abortion is the only plausible route for a pregnant woman in certain circumstances to go down. Where there is potential or actual disability, the medical profession can actively seek to influence a woman in that direction. Is a genuinely pro-choice approach to abortion rarely served by Clause 9? My honourable friend in the other place, Sir Bernard Jenkin, supported it on the grounds that women have already agonised about their decision and considered every alternative by the time they arrive at the clinic. I would respectively disagree with this. In a pro-abortion culture soaked in rights rhetoric, many will have discounted the very possibility of going through with the pregnancy. There are plenty of examples from organisations like Be Here For Me of women who accepted an uncoercive offer to help to continue their pregnancies and have subsequently spoken out in favour of keeping this option open to other women. The Home Secretary concluded in 2018 that buffer zones would be a disproportionate response. So what has changed? Perhaps simply the United States Supreme Court decision to make abortion law the preserve of individual states. If passed into law, Clause 9 would mark the single most significant shift away from English law's presumption of individual liberty and freedom of expression in the interest of ruthlessly censoring pro-life views. Yes, These fly in the face of our current cultural norms and may only be held by a minority, but that is exactly what our fundamental freedoms of expression are designed to protect. Where will this end? Banning people from public areas near abortion facilities based purely on their beliefs could lead to any organisation dealing with contentious matters staking a claim for buffer zones around their premises. A gender dysphoria clinic could seek a buffer zone excluding those voicing concerns about puberty blockers, or a foreign embassy could request a buffer zone near its premises to prevent people speaking out against the regime. What would become criminal is whatever dissent a group wants to prosecute. The great protests of history show that choosing the time, place and manner of assembly matters deeply. Crowds gathered at Clapham Common for the Sarah Everard vigil last year, as we've heard already, to make the point that this must never happen again. In July, a brave Catholic priest launched a free three-day protest outside a Hong Kong maximum security prison to demand the release of activists and politicians. Could the message of either of these protests really have been effectively communicated elsewhere? Blanket bans on fundamental rights rarely meet the requirements of proportionality in rights legislation, hence the Minister not being able to sign off the bill, as we've heard, as rights compliant. Clause 9 disproportionately interferes not only with protest, but also freedom of speech, assembly and religion. Presented as a small and necessary step to protect women outside abortion centres, it is in fact a giant and unnecessary leap away from our hard-fought civil liberties. Finally, I understand this was subject to a conscience vote in the other place. Why? I would challenge the designation as an issue of conscience. This is not about whether abortions should take place or not. This culturally authoritarian clause criminalises someone praying silently with their eyes closed. It is both deeply absurd and deeply dangerous. It should not stand part of this bill.
Finally, my Lords, a word about Article 9, a late amendment to this bill in the other place, which seeks to create an offence of interference with access to or provision of abortion services, and would introduce 150-metre wide buffer zones, also known as censorship or safe zones, around abortion providers. My Lords, when protests do take place, they are typically quiet prayer groups, which occasionally do display signs or placards. However, participants do not cajole nor harass women. There is no interference with access to or the provision of abortion services. Approximately 90% of all clinics and hospitals have not reported either activity as ever having occurred. According to the findings of the 2018 Home Office review, a blanket ban around abortion clinics, my Lords, would be disproportionate. It would be a denial of the right to freedom of expression. It is unnecessary, and it could even be harmful. The reality is that many of those taking part in these vigils do often provide help to vulnerable women. Historically, as a result of expressions of prayer and offers of help, women have been able to avail of practical, emotional and other forms of support, of which they may previously have been unaware or were unable to access. Some women who may feel uncertain but feel forced to terminate a pregnancy because of their fears that they cannot cope, who might be reassured by what they might hear before they get into the clinic, will inevitably suffer if a disproportionate ban is enforced. Some of these women, my Lords, have never had the opportunity to receive impartial counsel and support as they considered their options. On the 24th of October, the Noble Lord the Minister said that the bill is generally compatible with Convention rights. I regret that I do not agree with him on that point. I do, however, agree with him in relation to his comment on Clause 9 of the bill. He stated, "I'm unable, but only because of Clause 9, to make a statement that, in my view, the provisions of the bill are presently compatible with Convention rights." He was saying that Clause 9 is not compatible with Convention rights. Current laws, my Lord, already provide wide-ranging powers for authorities to keep public order and protect women and the public from genuine harassment and intimidation outside abortion clinics. The Ealing PSPO shows a nationwide ban is unnecessary, and that further measures to ban peaceful demonstrations can have the unintended consequences of harming the individuals seeking to express their views. Clause 9 is poorly drafted. It's so broadly worded that it could be used to criminalise people who merely express opinion outside an abortion facility. My Lords, in 2018, the Home Office concluded that there was no need to introduce buffer zones. The then Home Secretary Sajid Javid said, introducing national buffer zones would not be a proportionate response, considering the experience of the majority of hospitals and clinics, and considering that the majority of activities are more passive in nature. This position has been consistently reaffirmed by the government since then, most recently on the 27th of September 2022. A June 2021 poll undertaken by Savanta Comres shows that only 21% of the population support under introducing buffer zones around abortion clinics nationwide. A majority support either having no restrictions on speaking about the issue of abortion outside abortion clinics or restrictions in line with current legislation. Clause 9 is not only not convention compatible, but it's also disproportionate, as police officers already have the powers to intervene. If a vigil was calling harassment or harm, they can intervene under the Public Order Act, the Protection from Harassment Act, the civil provisions of the Public Space Protection Order, and the Crime and Policing Act 2014. A person guilty of these offences would be liable in the first instance to imprisonment of up to 6 months and/or an unlimited fine, and in further instances to up to 2 years imprisonment and/or an unlimited fine. The offences, my Lord, vary from seeking to influence, advising, persuading, informing, to persistently, continually, or repeatedly occupying the area within the proposed buffer zone. My Lords, we value and believe in free speech. Surely we do not think it's appropriate to criminalise those who seek to exercise their rights. I realise
that it's a 9-minute advisory time, but could I ask the noble lady to bring it to an end, please? Thank you.
Shortly, yes, my Lord. Surely we do not think it's appropriate to criminalise those who seek to exercise their rights to free speech by advising, persuading or informing, or even simply being present, quietly, unobtrusively. This is what happens in places like Hong Kong, China, Russia, not the UK. Such a penalty would, my Lord, be imposed in our country on those who seek only to pray and to offer help to women who may be in a desperate situation, for whom help can be provided. I have met some of these women and their babies. I have seen the joy in the presence of their little ones. This is not an argument about access to abortion or preventing access. That right exists in law. Clause 9 would deprive people from offering help and support to women, for whom such help could be the difference between the choice to terminate the life of their unborn child and the ability to bring that child into the world in a safe place. My Lords, this bill also reverses the traditional burden of proof which lies on the prosecution to prove any offence beyond a criminal doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt.
I really must ask the noble lady to bring it to an end.
I will. I've very little to say. Just bear with me, my Lords. This is an important point. That clause is inconsistent with the common law presumption of innocence and the protections under Article 6. In conclusion, then, my Lords, the bill, while well-intentioned and probably reflecting a desire by the government to try and show that it's strong, will deprive people of their historic, indeed ancient, rights to protest. This is not what we as a country should be doing. We must not place an initial and unnecessary burden on our police. We need, at this perilous time in the world, to protect the rights of people to protest peacefully. We need to utilise existing laws to deal with those who commit some of the many criminal offences which we have witnessed. We can do this, my Lords. This bill is disproportionate in its effect and would be very damaging to those freedoms and constitutional rights which we have cherished as a people across.
There seem to be a litany of problems with Clause 9, but let me pick up on just a few. First of all, I want to make it clear, absolutely clear, that I support the view that it is unacceptable for women to face harassment or intimidation of any kind. If people are found to be doing this outside abortion clinics, they should be dealt with swiftly and support should be provided to victims. I think it is important that to be clear, that we already have laws which provide wide-ranging powers for authorities to keep public order and protect women from harassment and intimidation, including outside abortion clinics. These include police powers to protect women who are harassed and intimidated, and to take action where protests result in serious disruption. Indeed, that was the conclusion of the government itself when a former Home Secretary stated in 2018 that, I quote, "Legislation already exists to restrict protest activities that cause harm to others. And I am adamant that whenever a crime is committed, the police have the powers to act so that people feel protected." That was a Conservative previous Home Secretary. Even though this amendment was added to the bill in the other place, I note that the government still reiterated this position that there was enough legal protection for women in that position. The Home Office recently said that the government expects the police and local authorities to use their powers appropriately. I ask, therefore, what is the purpose of this clause? The police already have the powers needed to deal with harassment where it occurs. The only discernible difference seems to be that we will now make it that we are now also criminalising those who offer to support women in that position, often very vulnerable women, and criminalising quite a peaceful process. I do need to stress that I quite understand that proponents of Clause 9 are seeking to protect vulnerable women entering abortion clinics. It is absolutely the case that women experiencing crisis pregnancy can often be under a great deal of pressure and are therefore deserving of our support. However, the pressure can also cause many women to feel that they only have one option to terminate the pregnancy. Volunteers outside abortion clinics recognise this fact and are trying to simply help women to find out what help is available, and people like that should not be sentenced to prison for 6 months, for this is what this clause does, according to my reading of it. Are those in support of this clause really in favour of criminalising people who seek to help women with housing protection from domestic abuse, the provision of clothing, or a variety of other financial and legal support? The Be Here For Me campaign is a testimony to the value of this help can provide. One mother who is quoted as benefiting from this help said, "You don't have to disagree with abortion to see that simply offering alternatives should be legally permissible. The day that I turned up to my abortion appointment, a volunteer outside the clinic gave me a leaflet. It offered the help that I had been searching for." She further states, "There are hundreds of women just like me who have benefited from support." That might be only one example, but I think it's a clear example of how people can be helped. However, in this bill, my lords, we can't start using blunt instruments such as this clause to criminalise innocent volunteers. If we make it illegal to hand out a leaflet with offers of housing or support, we embark on a slippery slope that could lead to bans on other leaflets with which we disagree. Who among us would condone such a policy being imposed on the members of the other place during an election? Well, and yet that outcome becomes a possibility if this clause becomes law. Let us strongly oppose Clause 9. Let the government get the message here from, it seems, all sides of the House, and consider how we can protect the ability to offer valuable help to vulnerable women when they need it most.